Lady Madonna, when it came out, I thought, what is this? What are they doing? You never got it the first time round. Yeah. It took a few plays because every single was so different.
Those chords, you wouldn't really get those in a blues track.
It's a good example of Paul McCartney's songwriting style.
We actually changed key here, but it's very, very, very smooth. And it's changing key in the fashion that a jazz tune would. We were in A, and then we go to C, D minor, G, C. I think that really comes from his dad, who was a working jazz musician and would have introduced him a lot to those old American songbook classics.
It's another McCartney song, as an A-side, as a single.
Yeah.
Is it starting to show his sort of dominance in that field? It's early February 1968. British Railways have announced that the last steam locomotive will be withdrawn from service by the end of the year to be replaced by diesel and electric trains. The Graduate is showing in cinemas with a career-defining performance from Dustin Hoffman and a soundtrack featuring Simon and Garfunkel. The Viet Cong have struck over 100 targets, including the US Embassy in Vietnam during the Tet Offensive, altering public perception and sentiment to the war. And the Winter Olympics are set to begin in Grenoble in France, where the UK go on to win no medals. Meanwhile, the Beatles are about to jet off to India to study transcendental meditation with Maharishi Mahesh Yogi. But to tide them over while they're away, they descend on Abbey Road Studios to record their next single, a blues-inspired McCartney-penned rocker, Lady Madonna. This is UnBeatled, the show where each episode we delve deep into one song recorded by the Fab Four. With the help of an expert, we examine the history, writing, recording and impact of the song, while our resident musician unpicks the lyrics and the music. I'm joined by Beatles expert and music industry insider David Stark and musician and Fab Four fanatic Dave Bennett. So please me and subscribe, like and comment to UnBeatled with Donnie Campbell on YouTube. Today we break down their 17th single, Lady Madonna. Hi David and Dave. So, Lady Madonna, written late 67, recorded early 68. 1966 and 1967 had been marked in music and in the scene around the time, especially around the Beatles, as a sort of a psychedelic experience, a couple of years, you know?
Yeah, to an extent, definitely.
Songs were embracing classical music and jazz and, you know, use of different instruments and...
Well, of course, they had so many songs in 68 that, and 67, when you think about Sgt. Pepper and Penny Lane, Strawberry Fields Forever, and of course Magical Mystery Tour, EP, and an album in the States and here eventually. But their output was incredible. So, and all styles of music, psychedelic and rock, and Paul loved, 20s, 30s styles, stuff like Your Mother Should Know. So, when Lady Madonna came out, I must admit, we'd just got over Magical Mystery Tour at the time, which wasn't their biggest success as a TV film, but I enjoyed it. But then we were listening to songs like Hello Goodbye, which was incredible. And then Lady Madonna, when it came out, I thought, what is this? What are they doing? And I think a lot of people thought the same, and then it always happened with Beatles singles, you never got it the first time round. Yeah. It took a few plays because every single was so different from the previous one. And so Lady Madonna was very much, as you said, a kind of blues, Bourbon Street rocker. But it quickly caught on, went to #1, and it's a classic Beatles single.
And Dave, this is sort of a little bit different. So obviously within the Beatles in 66, 67, we've had Rain in 66, and we had Sgt. Pepper, Magical Mystery Tour, the film, all very psychedelic, all of that time, very 60s. We can talk about Pink Floyd, Procol Harum's Whiter Shade of Pale. But Lady Madonna was a departure from this sort of psychedelic sound that had been happening in the world at that time.
Particularly on Sgt. Pepper, you hear all of those different sound worlds they came up with, all sorts of different orchestration and fusions of styles, and yet Lady Madonna is really taking it back to where the Beatles came from, not purely because it's not a guitar-focused song like so many of the early Beatles songs were, but it's very much looking backwards. And as a person who came to the Beatles in the the 90s and the 2000s, looking back on them, I'm always surprised to remember how late Lady Madonna came out in their discography. I always think of it more as a sort of day tripper era song, and it feels more at home in that space. But yeah, Paul was pulling inspiration here from boogie woogie, from jazz, and one particular tune, Bad Penny Blues by Humphrey Lyttelton, which had been a hit in the 50s and actually was produced by George Martin, which might be how Paul came to know the song.
And he wrote it in late 67, and then he takes it into the studio in 68, early 68, before they go off to India to study meditation. And he says it's inspired, he was sat at a piano and it was inspired by, as he said, Bad Penny Blues and Fats Domino.
Yes, I think the Fats Domino may be a more of a lyrical influence. You can certainly imagine the stylistic as well, but I believe Fats Domino has a song called Blue Monday, which goes through days of the week. And that might be where he got that format from for Lady Madonna, going through the days of the week.
And also he maybe got the influence from the singing style. He changes his voice, McCartney.
True, he's doing his little impression he does. There's so many songs I always think of, like Get Back, for example, where unless you were told it's McCartney, it sounds like someone completely different. It's him doing his impression of an American R&B singer, and maybe Fats Domino was who he was channeling in that moment.
And so, David, what influenced Paul McCartney to write this song? It's got sort of strange.
Well, yeah, maybe I believe that the title references a picture he saw in a magazine, and also I think it alludes to his late mother Mary as well. It's just a great title. When it came out, oh, Lady Madonna, what does this mean? And then, of course, the storyline in the song, as well as the Fats Domino song, I think it's based on the old Monday's Child poem. From Monday's Child is full of joy, and it goes through the days of the week except for Saturday. And it's a very clever lyric. See how they run the stockings, and there's lots of great lines in that song. As you say, his voice perfect for the record, absolutely perfect. The piano, the part, the way it starts, the riff, the piano riff, just fantastic. Yeah,
well, the riff is actually quite similar to Bad Penny Blues, particularly in the left hand. So what we've got on Lady Madonna in the left hand is this octave jumping thing where he plays one note, then the octave up, and he goes. With the right hand, and Bad Penny Blues, same type of left hand part. Bad Penny Blues, as you can hear, that was Bad Penny Blues there. Very similar DNA. It's got that same blue note in it, the blues scale, as we have in it. And the left hand in particular. Very, very similar. And I believe there's a quote from Humphrey Lyttelton where his management came to him and said, the Beatles have released this song, it's obviously ripping off your Bad Penny Blues, let's litigate. And he said, no, that's ridiculous. I was just ripping off another blues piano player. This is just all bog standard stuff. You can't, sue someone over that.
That's a good point, because I mean, that continues to crop up. I think Pete Townsend said it about a One Direction song. He was like, I can't copyright 3 chords. Yeah. That's what he pretty much said.
Exactly, that I remember that case as well. And thank God for these musicians like Humphrey Lyttelton, Pete Townsend, who understand the spirit of music, which is, you're always reusing the things you've heard before, and it's only the lawyers and the record companies who really do all those lawsuits. The musicians are very rarely the ones driving that.
So he wrote Lady Madonna, and we've spoken about the lyrics, and he was influenced. It sort of tells a story of a working class mother and children at her feet, and you could say that Liverpool would have been a backdrop, perhaps, for a woman like this.
Yeah.
and the stockings, see how they run.
Yeah.
It's a good example of Paul McCartney's songwriting style, of sort of like a story, with a protagonist. Rather
Imagery, which you don't get people writing songs like that these days. I mean, it's clever lyric writing. It's songcraft. It really, and the master at his best almost, really, and then making a great record out of it, plus all the other instruments on it as well.
Of course, yeah. And so he wrote it, being inspired by, Mother Mary, the picture in National Geographic of Mountain Madonna, a woman breastfeeding. And he's got this imagery, he's got this great blues lick, it fits, and he gets into Abbey Road, or EMI Studios on Abbey Road, and he decides that this is the next single before they go off to India. Yeah,
and they were originally really trying to recreate the sound of Bad Penny Blues. Obviously, it helped that they had the exact producer with them, but they used an upright piano rather than a grand piano to try and get more of that boogie-woogie sound. And initially, I think Ringo was just there with brushes on a snare drum, really going for that more swing, skiffle style. But obviously, eventually, we wind up with guitars on it and a fuller arrangement, and it really becomes more of a fusion of the old jazz boogie-woogie style and the more contemporary rock music.
Mm-hmm. And you can hear that, I suppose, in John and George's guitars, which was plugged into the same amplifier, distorted, doing the same line together, playing at the exact same time.
Really interesting choice.
And then of course they call in Ronnie Scott on sax,
of course,
and a few others to help out on it, and it's got a terrific sound, and that was new at the time. Oh, it's the Beatles with a kind of jazz band. Amazing, really, and so effective, and their backing vocals, brilliant on it as well. All that business.
Yeah, all doing impressions
kind
of horns.
Yeah, toilet paper and comb style, really. It was a, it took a while to really sink in, but it's a great record.
Sounded like they were having fun on making this record.
Yeah, definitely.
And of course, originally, it wasn't going to be the single because they had been working on John's song, Across the Universe. There's still a bit of psychedelia there, but they couldn't get it right.
Yeah, and that song then comes out on the World Wildlife Foundation album?
It came on an album I bought for 12 and sixpence later that year, and that was a very rare thing to have a Beatles unreleased Beatles song on a charity album. But so that came out later. But Lady Madonna, obviously Paul had it, perfect single. Paul Strikes Again.
Yeah, he's doing that a lot around this time.
Yeah.
So Dave, talk us through Lady Madonna. What is happening musically?
Yeah, so we're talking just then about this piano riff that's at the heart of it. And that idea is the foundation of the verse, the A section, whatever you want to call it. It's following quite a simple blues style until it does that thing where it climbs all the way up the keyboard. And here, those chords, you wouldn't really get those in a blues track. And this is a great example of Paul fusing an old style with the new. But then that's the A section. Then we go to the middle eight, and we actually change key here. But it's very, very, very smooth. And it's changing key in the fashion that a jazz tune would, using what we would call a 2-5-1, the 2 and the 5 of a new key, which is C. So we were in A, and then we go to C, D minor, G, C. And I think, you see these 2-5-1s a lot in Paul's writing. I think the earliest one was From Me to You in the middle eight there. And I think that really comes from his dad, who was a working jazz musician and would have introduced him a lot to those old American songbook classics where the 2-5-1, changing key just halfway through a song, so typical of those old jazz standards. Mm-hmm. But of course, it's not just a simple key change, we've then got this marching bass line, that's relentless bass line. And then we need to get back to where we started. So he throws in this. And And now we've pivoted back to where we were. And we can just go on, rinse and repeat.
And of course, that See How They Run, it also references Three Blind Mice. Nursery rhyme.
Right,
We mustn't forget that. That's where that came from, really. Very clever.
All these little elements,
Very clever.
They always weave in little elements from their childhood, don't they? They've got,
absolutely.
like even One After 909 and it comes up later, and Maggie May, they do and Let It Be, and then Lewis Carroll inspired lyrics. They're always weaving in something from growing up.
Yes.
And as I said, we had sax, which came from the Beatles imitating the brass instruments.
So originally they were just imitating the brass instruments, which is why we get that fun sort of almost chicken sounding BV. But then very short notice, they did get some horns involved, including Ronnie Scott, who is of course famous for his club in London. And Paul, quite typically of Paul, didn't prepare notation, sheet music for the musicians, which would have been standard procedure. So instead they turn up and they're expected just to sort of make stuff up on the spot. But they rose to the challenge and it sounds fantastic on it. You can hear in particular Ronnie Scott riffing over the middle sections. And if you've ever listened to the Love version of this track that they did for the Cirque du Soleil show, they used a lot more of Ronnie Scott's take on there, and you can really hear how he was really going to town on it, and they cut most of it out, really.
That's interesting. They were meticulous, weren't they, with what they wanted and what they didn't. And so they've now got a sax, which is not new for Beatles, but it's certainly different.
They'd had lots of horns before, but it would usually have been arranged by George Martin. I think that was the difference. He would usually write a score for it, and instead this was, in the sort of jazz spirit of it, just improvisation. Yeah,
probably the one song. Actually, no, I'm just my time. No, it would have been "Got to Get You Into My Life," which had a full brass section on it. That came out on Revolver.
Yeah, and that's far more composed. You can feel how that's been planned out.
Yeah.
But I think that one of the other sax players on this track, not Ronnie Scott, he also later worked on some of the White Album tracks, including Savoy Truffle, I think.
Oh, wow. And something about the outro that's different.
Yeah, so the Beatles often had this way of, even in a 2-minute song, every moment had to be a little bit different, something special, and they often would have an outro, something a little bit different at the end that you hadn't heard up until that point. And what we get here is, so it's obviously a variation on the main riff, but it's not the same thing. And it's got a very typically blues sound to it. But it's just moments like that that really give a full character to these songs. They're not just section A, section B, and let's repeat, and let's repeat, and that's the end. Every moment has got its own little landmarks to it.
And the song comes out in early '68. It's selected as the A-side of the single, as we said, to the detriment of Across the Universe, which John's not particularly happy with the arrangement anyway, so I think he's quite happy to pull it. They do it again. Goes to #1 in the UK and #4 in the US.
Yes.
First song since Eleanor Rigby that didn't go straight to #1 in the United States.
Right.
Well, hugely successful again, but it was maybe not the same thirst for the Beatles in maybe the States as before. Is that fair to say?
Maybe not. I mean, well, I wasn't too bothered about that at the time, but obviously the record label would have been a bit upset it didn't reach #1, but never bothered me. Listening in London, and February '68. Well, the Beatles, as you said, they flew off to India at that time, so it was.
They wouldn't have been checking themselves.
Yeah, it was quite interesting that they were away for quite a few weeks, really, and so the Lady Madonna comes out, fills the gap, and then they had to have a bit of film to promote it as well. So they put something together very quickly of them in the studio to the sound of Lady Madonna, but they actually used the film clip of them recording "Hey Bulldog," which was which would end up on the Yellow Submarine soundtrack later that year. So, and I remember going to the cinema. There was a short about I forget what it was called. It was about music and pop music, and it was like a short B film, and they used that Beatles clip in it of the Hey Bulldog visuals and the Lady Madonna sound.
So they used this as a promotional clip while they were away in India
Yeah.
to sort of like make sure they could
Yeah.
be played on top of the pops and stuff like
Exactly.
that. The footage, which I've seen on the one DVD compilation that I got growing up, looks like they're having fun in the studio. You could say this was a period of good relations within the Beatles. They were
definitely
enjoying themselves. Yeah.
Yeah. No. Well. Particularly. Well, obviously, we're watching them working on Hey Bulldog, which was a fun song, and that had a. Also, it was a piano rocker, so that's why the film fitted, because it was not a million miles away, in fact. So it kind of served its purpose as a promo, basically, and also at that time, they were looking different. They were, John was growing his sideburns, yeah, exactly, and every few weeks the Beatles' look would change from one record to another. So that was the other thing. Oh, what they're going to look like for the new record. I was a kid, like we were lapping it up basically.
So they're looking different every week, but they're also sounding different month by month. Lady Madonna is certainly a departure from what was the last, release of. A few months prior had been Strawberry Fields Forever. This is certainly
Penny Lane, Strawberry Fields, Magical Mystery Tour, very different.
And then the B-side, The Inner Light, one of the Beatles' most sort of unusual records, George Harrison's Indian influence at its most prominent. A really un-Beatlish song, really.
So what can we say about Lady Madonna? Did it indicate a move away from psychedelia as a whole? Within '68, the Stones have stopped writing songs like She's a Rainbow and they're back to Jumpin' Jack Flash. Is it indicative of sort of a move away from that?
Yeah, it was
towards back to the roots.
It was a back to the roots, back to the basics. Obviously, Paul. I'm also thinking. Paul was thinking about his dad. Jim McCartney had his own jazz band. I think he was doing it as a bit of homage to his father as well. I'm sure his dad would have loved the record with all the brass and sax on it, and of course his dad was still alive then. And Paul, he just loves and can write in any style, really, rock to 20s and 30s pastiches, which this is what this is a bit as well.
Definitely. Well, and the Beatles are so varied, they're almost not the best way to track the general style of that decade, because although in the early days they were very much, that was the pop music sound, once you get to albums like the White Album or Abbey Road, they're so varied track to track that they're not really reflective of the trends. They're just what the Beatles wanted to do. They didn't seem to care about genre or style or these boxes we put around styles of music. They just thought, we'll have a bit of that and a bit of that and put it all together.
But then people look to them as the sort of, the first, expeditionists into certain territory.
Yeah.
Yet they didn't know where they were going. They were just going on how they felt.
By then they had a lot of competition in the charts because we had Jimi Hendrix, Cream, Led Zeppelin, The Who, the Stones, it was all going crazy at that time. And, so the Beatles come out with quite a retro single, really, going against the grain, as it were. But it worked. They were still massively popular. So, of course, it went to #1 in the UK and many other countries.
And I suppose it symbolised, their move into stripping it back, especially on the White Album. That's a stripped back recording, writing process. This Lady Madonna, even before they went to India, was starting to go that way.
The Get Back sessions as well, the whole idea was to get back to the original formula, being a real band, a blues band. And yet this track has obviously got the blues elements in it, but yet it's still not the sort of song you would have heard them playing in the early days. It's definitely got something they picked up along the way, like a creativity to use instruments like the piano and that saxophones, that sort of thing.
And It's another McCartney song.
And he's
As an A-side, as a single.
Yeah.
Is it starting to show his sort of dominance in that field, in the Beatles?
Well, Paul, yeah, at that time, I think Paul, he was running the show to a degree after, Brian Epstein died in August '67, and Paul was almost managing the Beatles after that happened, and it was his idea to do Magical Mystery Tour, and it was a punishing schedule really. So Paul writes a song. Let's put it out, and he was the master of his craft, and it was of its time, and he still plays it live today. Every single
of his,
show,
isn't it? He's particularly proud of it in the same way that
Yeah.
John is proud of Help. I think Paul has a certain feeling towards Lady Madonna. Definitely. And next he does Hey Jude. I think the single before was Hello Goodbye. Yeah. So it's a run of McCartney.
Patrick,
You're right.
Yeah. He's starting to exert a little bit more control.
Yeah, and Hey Jude, another absolute classic Beatles tune that wasn't on an LP. And the same with Lady Madonna. It's amazing to think back, and some of the Beatles' greatest and most well-known songs aren't even on their amazingly iconic albums.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they did that intentionally. Brian Epstein always wanted to give value to the fans, so he wouldn't put the singles on the album. So even when they released, what was it, Day Tripper, We Can Work It Out, came out the same day, I think, as Rubber Soul.
Right, yeah,
So that was it. So he wanted to give them more value.
Yeah.
Well, also to sell more records.
True, yeah.
But they're always conscious. They wanted to give as much value to the fans as possible.
And cover versions. Fats Domino does his own version.
Oh,
It's inspired. Paul McCartney says it's inspired by Fats Domino. Fats Domino returns the favour.
Circle, yeah.
And we've got a cover by Elvis jamming it in the studio. It's a great listen because he doesn't know the words, but it sounds great. If only he'd done a full version of it. And Aretha Franklin does a cover of it. So clearly, it's got that sort of staying power and the sort of the draw of big time musicians.
Yeah, and I'm sure quite a few big bands have done it over the years. Definitely.
So now we've done a few episodes. We've got 4 in the bag. Let's start rating them. Let's start putting a little list together.
Oh.
So we've got Please Please Me, we've got Here Comes the Sun, we've got Help, and we've got Lady Madonna. David, what's your top 4 out of those?
Oh, wow. Okay. Very hard to say, to put them in order of preference. I suppose I go with Help, really. Such an iconic John song. But there we go. But then Please Please Me, first one I ever heard. That's still a big one for me as well. Yeah. Here Comes the Sun, the most popular Beatles song of all time now. And Lady Madonna. Yeah, I think it's great. I wouldn't put it at the top, but it's a great song.
Dave, quickly.
Yeah, I think Here Comes the Sun is the one I would go with. It's the one I play the most when I'm at the piano. All the time signatures and the chords, it's such a fun play. But, how can you pick your favourite out of a selection like that? That was the beauty of the Beatles, is they had so many good songs that you couldn't choose. And it's the same reason that they could afford to have singles and albums as 2 separate things, because they didn't have just one song that they had to keep reselling to you.
Well, my favourite episode will be... my favourite song will be in a later episode, so I'll be able to talk about that then.
Yeah.
That's it for this episode of UnBeatled. Thank you, David. Thank you, Dave, for joining me. Tune in next episode where we discuss She Loves You.